We're celebrating something very special this week, and that's why we call this week Holy. If it were not for this week, we would not be here. Oh, I don't mean we would not be here today. I mean we would never be here. If it were not for this week, there would be no reason for us to be here. If it were not for this week, there would not be any church here. If it were not for this week, there wouldn't be any church anywhere. If it were not for this week, there would not be 1.2 billion Catholics in the world. If it were not for this week, there would not be 2.4 billion Christians in the world. If it were not for this week, 1/3 of the world's population would not recognize the name Jesus Christ and call him Lord. If it were not for this week, the name Jesus Christ would be a mere footnote in human history, an interesting man who lived 2,000 years ago and attracted a small band of followers who thought that he was the Messiah who had come to reestablish Israel as a world power. If it were not for this week, he would be among the other Messiah wannabes forgotten to the world except for a few scholars of Middle Eastern history. But we are celebrating this week, which we call Holy. Why? Because we do believe that what happened this week, almost 2,000 years ago in Israel, changed human history forever and changes our lives today. We do believe that the actions of Jesus Christ, his passion, his death, and his resurrection are the turning point of human history and the basis upon which the purpose and meaning of our lives are grounded. Now, since it is Holy Week, we will be hearing and seeing the story of Jesus more than once. We have just heard what is called the Passion of Jesus Christ by St. Luke, and on Good Friday we will hear the Passion according to St. John. But besides these scriptural accounts that we hear in our liturgical celebrations, the media will probably be flooded with religious music, religious movies, and documentaries. Everything that's even remotely connected to Jesus Christ will probably be aired. The Robe, Quo Vadis, and anything else they can find to boost their ratings. Now, there are two dangers in hearing and seeing the story of Jesus Christ in so many ways. The first is that it can turn us into mere spectators, watching an historical drama that we know so well unfold before us once again. It can make the Passion of Jesus Christ seem distant, so long ago and far away, and consequently irrelevant to our lives. A second, more subtle problem is that in watching this event unfold before our eyes again, we might be tempted to identify with one of the many characters we encounter, and there are so many to choose from. Depending on how we are feeling about our own spiritual life and where we are in our relationship with God, we might identify with Judas, the betrayer, Peter, the coward, Pilate or Herod, the merciless judges, the two thieves hanging on crosses on either side of Jesus, or perhaps more positively with Mary mourning the loss of her son, Mary Magdalene and the holy women at the foot of the cross, Veronica boldly wiping the face of Jesus, or Simon of Cyrene helping Jesus to carry his cross. Dozens of characters in whom we could recognize ourselves. But that would be a mistake, because there is only one person with whom we should identify, and that is Jesus Christ himself. This is found in our second reading that we heard proclaimed today from Paul's letter to the Philippians. This reading gives us the key to understanding and entering into the true dynamic of Holy Week. St. Paul wrote, "Christ, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God something to be grasped. Rather, he emptied himself, taking the form of a slave. He humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Because of this, God greatly exalted him." This, sisters and brothers, is the dynamic of Holy Week, and it is summed up in verse 7, which says, "He emptied himself." The Greek word is kenosis, which can be translated, "He poured himself out," meaning he gave everything. We see that when Jesus' side is pierced with a lance and blood and water flow forth. there's nothing left to give. Now, modern scripture scholars widely agree that St. Paul in this second chapter is quoting one of the earliest Christological hymns that was composed prior to Paul's time, and it's called the Carmen Christi, the Song of Christ. Analysis of its structure indicates that Paul made some small but significant additions, such as adding even death on the cross to the line, he became obedient unto death. So it now reads, he became obedient unto death, even death on a cross. But wait, there is something missing in what we heard today in that second reading. Something that was in the older version of the lectionary, and which unfortunately the Revised Lectionary has omitted. What is omitted are the 5 words of verse 5, which St. Paul inserts as an introduction to this hymn, this Carmen Christi. Those 5 words form the key to understanding the meaning of this week for our lives and for our world today. Those 5 critical words are, your attitude must be Christ's. In other words, we must identify with Jesus Christ, how he lived and how he died. We must imitate him in his humble service, in his self-giving love, in his emptying himself for the sake of others. We must imitate him in his obedience and even in the carrying of his cross. And if we do, then we too will be exalted and raised to everlasting life. Sisters and brothers, this week we are celebrating not only what Jesus did in time long ago, but we are celebrating those actions long ago and what they mean for us and our world today. We are celebrating who we are called to be and how we are called to live. It's the reason we're here this week. It's the reason we must always be here.